I never thought I'd be writing something like this. If you'd asked me a year ago if I'd ever doubt my wife, I would have laughed. We had everything: a home, careers, 2 kids, the kind of life people aspire to. But sometimes, life throws a curveball you never saw coming. My wife, Sarah, she changed. And it wasn't the kind of change you can ignore. At first, I thought it was just a phase. Work stress, maybe. You know how it goes. I'd been busy myself, working late hours, taking on extra projects. But when I came home late one night and found Sarah scrolling through her phone with that distant look in her eyes, it was different. It wasn't the usual tired, I'm just winding down vibe she used to have. No, this felt colder. Like she was in a different world, one I wasn't a part of. I tried to brush it off, tell myself it was nothing. But the distance between us started to grow. She'd spend more time on her phone, always texting, always on the move, always with that guarded look. The sweet hugs I used to get after a long day, gone. Her excuses? Oh, just work stuff. But I wasn't stupid. Work wasn't the issue, there was something else. And then, the weirdest thing happened. One night, she didn't come home on time. I waited up for her like I always did. Hours passed. No call, no text, just nothing. When she finally walked through the door, it was like nothing had changed, like she hadn't been 3 hours late without a word. She smiled at me, kissed me on the cheek, and went straight to bed. But I could feel it. The tension. The unspoken thing that neither of us wanted to admit. It wasn't until later that I started putting the pieces together. I found something. A slip of paper, a name scrawled on it. A number. A number that didn't belong to anyone I knew. It wasn't her friend's number. And it wasn't for work. That's when I knew. Something wasn't right. The person who had been texting her wasn't a colleague. No, it was someone else. And as much as I tried to avoid it, I couldn't stop myself from digging deeper. My heart pounded as I checked the history of her phone bill. It was there, staring me in the face. Hundreds of messages, calls, long conversations late at night, when she said she was just working late. Who was this person? And why was she lying about them? But here's the thing, I still didn't know. Who was it? What had happened? Was it just a friend, or something more? And as I stood there, staring at the numbers and the messages, I knew one thing for sure. Things were about to change. I just had no idea how. And that's where it all starts. The more I dug, the more unsettling the picture became. I tried to stay calm, but every time I thought I had it figured out, another layer of mystery was added. It wasn't just the late nights anymore, or the distant looks. It was the way Sarah started acting when I was around, like I wasn't even there. One afternoon, I came home early from work, planning to surprise her. But as I entered, I heard a low voice. Male. My heart dropped. It wasn't like we had guests at this hour. I froze in the doorway. The conversation wasn't loud, but I could hear Sarah's voice. It was soft, almost flirtatious. Then the man spoke again. I can't wait to see you again. We'll be careful next time. I stood frozen, my mind racing. Who was this? Someone I knew? A colleague? The truth began to settle in. Sarah, my wife, was having an affair. This wasn't some mistake. This was planned. The voice sounded familiar, though. I couldn't place it. Was it someone she knew well? I had no idea, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. I turned to leave but stopped when I heard Sarah say, "He's too busy to notice. He's never around anyway." The words hit like a punch to the gut. She wasn't just emotionally checked out. She had been planning this. I walked into the kitchen to regain my composure. She came in, and when she saw me, she smiled a little too casually. "You're home early." I nodded, trying to hide the storm brewing inside. I wanted to ask, to confront her, but something in me said not yet. I needed to be sure. Later that night, as we lay in bed, I thought about the voice. Who was he? I had to find out. And that search would lead me somewhere unexpected, straight into the arms of a man I never saw coming. The truth was just within reach. And soon, it would shatter everything. I couldn't let it go. Every time I closed my eyes, the voice echoed in my head. That man, who was he? What had been going on behind my back? I knew I couldn't confront Sarah just yet. Something told me to gather the pieces, to understand the full picture before I made my move. The next day, while she was at work, I went through her phone. It felt wrong, invasive even, but I couldn't help myself. I needed answers. I scanned her messages, the recent ones. Nothing stood out at first, just the usual mundane things. Work updates, dinner plans with friends, and then, there it was. A message from a number I didn't recognize. "I can't wait to see you again. Let's make it happen this weekend." Same time, same place. My heart stopped. I scrolled back through the conversation, each text more intimate than the last. It wasn't just casual talk. It was clear. They had been seeing each other for months. My stomach turned as I realized I wasn't just dealing with a momentary slip. This was a full-blown affair. But the name, there was no name attached to the number, just a string of digits. My mind raced. Who was this person? How could she be so careless? She was always so careful with everything else. I put the phone down, trying to breathe through the wave of anger and betrayal. I knew I had to do something with this information. I needed to confront her, but I wasn't ready yet. I still didn't have all the answers. That evening, as she walked through the door, I acted normal. I smiled and asked about her day. She told me about work, about a few meetings. It all sounded so rehearsed. But I stayed quiet, biting my tongue. I had a plan forming in my mind. I wasn't going to let her think I was blind to what was happening. I had to know more, see where this would lead. If this affair was real, I wasn't going to let it destroy me without understanding who I was up against. The next few days were torture. Each time I saw Sarah, I felt the weight of the secret between us. I had to play my part, pretend everything was fine while I gathered the truth. But deep down, I knew I was only one step away from the inevitable confrontation. And soon, I'd find out exactly who I was competing with. But that, I realized, would be the hardest part of all. The days dragged on, each one heavier than the last. I knew I was on the edge of something, but I couldn't quite bring myself to take the plunge. I had to be patient, gather more pieces, more evidence. But the more I waited, the harder it became to keep up the charade. One evening, as I was sitting in the living room, Sarah's phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at it without thinking, but this time, something was different. The notification preview flashed a name I recognized. It wasn't a name I'd ever heard her mention before, but it hit me like a lightning bolt. Tom was a man I vaguely remembered, someone she'd mentioned casually a few times, someone who worked in her office. But the tone in her voice when she spoke about him had always seemed guarded. I quickly grabbed the phone. The message was from Tom, and it wasn't casual. Are we still on for tomorrow? I'm counting the minutes. You're incredible, Sarah. I can't wait to be with you again. My stomach dropped. That was it. It wasn't just an office colleague or a friend. This was something real. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen. I should have been angry, devastated even, but instead, I was numb. The anger would come later. Right now, I needed to understand how deep this went. I wanted to see everything. So, I swiped through the conversation. It was full of flirtatious banter, promises of more secret meetings, and declarations that their time together was worth the wait. I felt sick. I had been living in a house with this woman who had been sharing her life with another man. I could hardly breathe as I processed everything I had just uncovered. I wasn't sure what to do next. Confront her? I didn't feel ready. I needed more than just this one moment. I needed to hear it from her, see her face when she realized I knew. I took a deep breath and set the phone back down on the counter. I would wait. I would make sure that when I did confront her, I had every piece of the puzzle. That night, I lay in bed beside her, the distance between us growing even wider. I could feel her warmth, but it felt foreign now, like I was lying next to a stranger. She didn't know I knew, and I wondered just how long I could keep up the facade before everything came crashing down. The next day, everything changed. She wouldn't know it yet, but her life was about to unravel, and so was mine. The next few days were torture. I kept up the facade, smiling, talking, pretending everything was normal. But inside, I was falling apart. Every word Sarah spoke, every touch, felt like a reminder of her betrayal. The texts, the flirtations, the secret meetings, none of it left my mind. I wasn't ready to confront her. I needed time to gather more, to make sure I had all the answers. I wasn't going to face her with just a few texts. I wanted her to know the depth of her lies. Then, one night, I came home later than usual, hoping to have some time alone. But Sarah wasn't home. I checked my watch. She should have been back by now. I was about to call when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unfamiliar number. I'll see you soon. We have all the time in the world now. I froze. Tom. I didn't need to see his number to know. My stomach sank, but I didn't hesitate. I called Sarah. Hey, she answered, too casually. I'm running a little late. I'll be home in 20. Where are you? I asked, my voice steady, despite the pounding in my chest. I'm just finishing up some work with Tom, she said. I held my breath, trying to keep calm. I thought you were done with him for the day. There was a pause. I was. But I needed to help him with something. Her voice faltered. It wasn't a denial, just a weak excuse. But I didn't press further. I'll be home in 20, she said, hanging up. I stood still, phone in hand, processing it all. She didn't even try to lie. She didn't even care enough to cover up her tracks. And I realized, this wasn't just an affair. It was a complete betrayal. When she walked through that door, everything would change. But I wasn't sure I was ready for what would happen next. I didn't know how long I stood there, staring at the phone in my hand. But when Sarah finally walked through the door, I had a decision to make. She entered casually, her usual smile on her lips, but something was different. She hadn't noticed the change in me yet, but I was done pretending. I wanted to confront her then, but I needed her to say it. I needed her to admit what I already knew. So, I stayed quiet, acting like everything was fine. She started talking about her day, the usual work drama, nothing important. I watched her, trying to gauge how long I could keep up the charade. But then, she said it. I told Tom I'd help him with something tomorrow, so it'll be a late night again. The words hit me harder than I expected. My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. Tom? Is that what you're calling him now? She looked at me, a little confused. Yeah, what's wrong with that? Nothing, I said, trying to keep calm. But don't you think it's a bit much? Helping him so often, staying late? She shifted uncomfortably. It's just work, you know that. We've been really busy lately. I didn't reply immediately. I needed to let her stew in that discomfort. I wanted her to see that I knew exactly what was happening. You know, Sarah, I said, my voice low. You've been distant for weeks. I can't pretend I don't notice. Her eyes widened, and I saw a flicker of panic in them. But she quickly recovered. I'm just tired. We've been through a lot lately. Are you tired of me? I asked, the question hanging in the air. She froze. It was the first time I'd directly addressed it. I don't know what you mean, she stammered. I stepped closer. I know about Tom. I know what's been going on. I found the messages. All of it. Her face went pale. For a moment, she was silent, not knowing how to respond. Then, slowly, she sighed and sat down on the couch. I didn't want to hurt you, she said softly, looking away. But I wasn't happy anymore. I haven't been for a long time. The words stung more than I expected. I stood there, frozen, not knowing what to say. But inside, something snapped. She had been seeing him, lying to me, and for what? For this? You don't even care, do you? I asked quietly, almost to myself. I didn't want it to be like this, she whispered. I shook my head. But it is. And now we both have to face it. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. I had waited for this moment, but now that it was here, I didn't know what to do next. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was the end of everything I thought I knew about our marriage. And I wasn't sure how to move forward. The silence between us felt suffocating. Sarah sat there, hands twisted in her lap, avoiding my eyes. It was as if the world had stopped, and all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. I thought I'd prepared for this moment. Weeks of watching, gathering evidence, knowing what was happening. But now that it was out in the open, I didn't know how to feel. I wasn't angry yet, just numb. Finally, Sarah broke the silence, her voice shaky. I never meant for this to happen. It just did. She looked at me, her eyes pleading for some sort of understanding. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rage, but I didn't. Instead, I whispered, How long, Sarah? How long has this been going on? She looked down, swallowing hard. A few months, she said softly. I didn't want it to get this far, but it did. And by the time I realized, it was too late. A few months. I felt the weight of those words hit me hard. The late nights, the excuses, the distance, it all made sense now. But knowing didn't make it hurt any less. I took a breath, trying to steady myself. So what now? What do we do? She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. I don't know. I didn't want to hurt you. But I was looking for something I didn't have, and now I see I've lost everything. I wanted to leave, to walk out and never look back. But a small part of me still clung to the hope that maybe we could fix this. But how could I ever trust her again? I don't think I can do this anymore, I said, my voice barely holding together. I don't think I can trust you again. She nodded, tears flowing freely now. I understand, she whispered. The room felt smaller. I wanted to leave, to get away from the pain, but part of me was still tethered to what we once had. I needed space, time to think. I walked out, not just from the room, but from the life we built. For the first time, I realized I had to do this for myself. I didn't know what came next, but I knew I couldn't keep living in this lie. The days that followed felt like an endless blur. I stayed at a friend's house, needing distance from Sarah, from everything. I couldn't face her, couldn't look at the life we'd built together without feeling betrayed. Every corner of the house held memories of her laughter, her touch, and now all of it felt hollow. I wasn't sure what I expected from Sarah in the days after I left. An apology? A plea for forgiveness? But nothing came. She didn't reach out to me, didn't beg me to come home. Instead, I received a few texts from her, each more like a formality than a real attempt to reconnect. "Hope you're doing okay," one said. "Let's talk when you're ready," came another. But I wasn't ready. I didn't want to talk. I wanted to figure out what came next for me. And every time I thought about going back, I thought about Tom. The man she'd been seeing. The man she'd chosen over me. A week passed, then two. I could feel myself changing. The hurt was still there, but anger was starting to replace it. Anger at Sarah, but mostly at myself for not seeing the signs sooner. For not confronting her earlier. I wondered if I could have prevented all of this, but the truth was, I couldn't change what had already happened. Then, one evening, Sarah called. I didn't want to answer. I didn't want to hear her voice, didn't want to hear the excuses, but I picked up. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. I wanted to hang up. I wanted to tell her I was done, that I didn't need closure, but part of me still needed to hear it from her. I wanted her to admit it all, to take responsibility. "I don't know what you want me to say, Sarah," I said, my voice tight. "You've already said it. You chose him over me. You didn't care enough to fight for us." There was a long pause. She finally spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry. I was selfish. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know if I can." I wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that the woman I married was still in there somewhere. But I didn't know if I could ever trust her again. "I don't think I can come back," I said. "Not after what you've done." And with that, I ended the conversation. The decision had been made. But as I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. I didn't know how to move forward, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going back. And maybe, just maybe, that was the only thing I had left to hold on to. The weeks that followed were a mix of numbness and clarity. I stayed away from Sarah, gave her the space I needed to think, but each day felt like I was living in a fog. I had to move on, but everything around me felt like a constant reminder of what had been lost. Sarah tried to reach out, but I kept my distance. There were texts, brief and apologetic, but each one felt like an empty gesture. "I miss you," she wrote once. "I'm sorry for everything," in another. But no matter how many apologies she sent, they didn't change the fact that she had betrayed me. I had to face the harsh truth. This wasn't about forgiveness anymore. It was about me reclaiming my life, my peace of mind. I couldn't keep holding on to a relationship that no longer existed. It wasn't just the affair, it was the years of neglect, the lies, the emotional distance. I had been living in a marriage with someone who wasn't really there. One afternoon, I decided it was time to go back to the house. I hadn't stepped foot in it since that night, and I wasn't sure what I expected to find. But I knew I had to face it for my own closure. When I opened the door, the house felt different. Quieter, emptier. The life Sarah and I had built together felt like it belonged to someone else now. There were reminders of us everywhere. The family photos on the walls, our favorite books on the shelves, the little details that used to mean so much. But none of it made sense anymore. I walked through the house, touching things almost absent-mindedly, as if I was saying goodbye to the past. I didn't feel anger in that moment, just a profound sadness. What we had was over, and no amount of wishing could bring it back. I sat on the couch, staring at the space where Sarah and I had spent so many nights talking, laughing, and building our future. But now, it felt like nothing more than an empty shell. I knew I had to move on. I had to stop living in the past and start thinking about my future. But it wasn't easy. Even with the hurt, part of me still wished for things to go back to the way they were. Then my phone buzzed, breaking my thoughts. It was a message from Sarah. "I'm leaving. I've made my decision. I'm with him. I know this is the end for us, but I wanted you to hear it from me." I read it again, the finality of it sinking in. She had made her choice. And in that moment, I realized I had made mine, too. This was truly the end. I set my phone down, took a deep breath, and stood up. It was time to close this chapter for good. The next few days felt like a blur. After Sarah's message, I didn't know how to feel. Part of me was relieved that she had finally made her decision clear, but another part of me was still holding on to the faint hope that things could somehow be fixed. I had to remind myself that it wasn't my fault. I had tried, I had been there, but in the end, she had chosen someone else. I began the slow process of gathering my things. The house still felt like it belonged to both of us, and yet, it felt so foreign. Each item I packed up, books, clothes, photos, was a reminder of the life I thought I would have forever. I felt like I was being forced to leave a piece of me behind, but it was the only way forward. I didn't know what my future looked like. I didn't know if I wanted to date again, if I wanted to trust someone. The thought of opening myself up to anyone else felt impossible. But I knew I couldn't keep living in the shadow of the past. I had to rebuild. As the days went on, I spent more time focusing on myself. I took long walks, spent time with friends, and started working on things I'd put off for too long. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The pain started to fade, slowly but surely. One evening, a few weeks after Sarah left, I found myself sitting in a coffee shop, reading a book, just enjoying the quiet. It felt strange to be alone, but not in a bad way. There was a sense of peace that came with being by myself, something I hadn't felt in years. I didn't have to worry about pretending anymore. I could just be. Then, a familiar face walked in. It was one of my old friends from college. We hadn't seen each other in years, but she waved and walked over with a big smile. "Hey, how have you been?" she asked. We talked for hours that night, catching up on everything. It felt good to laugh again, to remember that there was a life outside of the hurt I had been carrying. And as we parted ways, I realized something. I was going to be okay. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight, but I was taking steps forward. The healing had begun, slowly, but it was happening. And maybe, just maybe, I could start looking forward to a future that was entirely my own. The days turned into weeks, and with each passing one, I found myself feeling more like myself again. The weight of the past hadn't completely disappeared, but it was no longer holding me down. The house felt quieter, but there was peace in that quiet. I spent my time rebuilding, finding new routines, and rediscovering parts of me that had been lost in the chaos of the past few years. I began to spend more time with friends. We went out to dinners, took weekend trips, and just caught up on life. It felt good to laugh again without feeling like something was missing. I was reminded that I wasn't alone, that I had a support system around me that I had taken for granted before. One evening, I found myself on a walk through the park, something I used to do when I was younger. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the path, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. Life had been hard, but I realized that I wasn't broken. I had come out on the other side, and there was still so much more for me to experience. As I walked, I saw a woman sitting on a bench, reading a book. She was familiar, but I couldn't quite place her. As I walked closer, she looked up and smiled, recognition crossing her face. "Hey, it's been a while," she said, standing up. It was Julia, an old friend from work who I hadn't seen in months. We had always gotten along well, but life had taken us in different directions. We talked for a while, catching up on the little things, what had happened in the past few months, where life had taken us. She was in the middle of a project that she was passionate about, and I found myself inspired by her enthusiasm. Before we parted ways, she asked, "Would you like to grab coffee sometime? It'd be good to catch up more." I hesitated for just a moment, the old doubts creeping in. Was I ready to meet someone new? Was I ready to take that step? But then I realized I didn't have to rush. I didn't have to be ready for anything, but I could at least be open to it. I smiled and agreed, exchanging numbers with her. As I walked away, I felt a sense of calm. It wasn't about jumping into something new or forcing myself to move on. It was about allowing myself the space to heal, to grow, and maybe, when the time was right, to see where things could go. For the first time in months, I felt a real sense of excitement for the future. Life was unpredictable, but it was also full of possibilities. And maybe, just maybe, I was ready for whatever came next. The weeks that followed my meeting with Julia were a strange mix of progress and hesitation. I spent time with her, but it was nothing serious, just coffee, occasional dinners, and long conversations about life, work, and everything in between. She was easy to talk to, and I enjoyed her company, but I kept reminding myself not to rush into anything. I was still healing from everything that had happened with Sarah, and I needed to focus on myself first. However, the more time I spent with Julia, the more I realized something. She made me feel normal. She wasn't trying to fix me, wasn't pushing me to move on, and didn't treat me like I was fragile. She just let me be. And that felt like a gift, something I hadn't had in a long time. One evening, as we sat at a small cafe near the park, I found myself telling her about the situation with Sarah, how everything had fallen apart. I had avoided talking about it at first, but with Julia, the words seemed to come out effortlessly. I don't really know what to do with it all, I said, taking a sip of my coffee. I'm not angry anymore, but it's like a part of me is still stuck there, still questioning, wondering if I could have done something different. Julia was quiet for a moment before she spoke. You can't change what happened, she said softly. What matters is that you're moving forward now. And that's the hardest part. Not everything is meant to make sense right away. Sometimes, we have to let go of the questions and just live with the answers we have. Her words resonated with me in a way I didn't expect. Maybe that was the key, letting go of the lingering what-ifs and accepting the reality of the situation. I had been stuck in a loop of regret, but now, I was starting to see that I could make a choice. I could either stay tethered to the past, or I could take a step forward into something new. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how far I had come since I first discovered Sarah's betrayal. Back then, I was consumed by pain, anger, and confusion. Now, there was a sense of peace that had slowly started to replace it. I wasn't sure if I was ready to jump into a new relationship, but I was ready to embrace the future, whatever it might hold. A few days later, Julia texted me asking if I wanted to join her for a weekend trip to the mountains. It was a spontaneous idea, and she promised it would be low-key, just some hiking, fresh air, and a break from the city. At first, I hesitated. I didn't want to rush into anything, but then I remembered what she had said. Sometimes, you just have to live with the answers you have. And maybe this was one of those moments where I could stop questioning and just be. I agreed. It wasn't about rushing anything. It was about taking another step forward. And for the first time in a long time, I felt excited about what that next step might look like. The trip to the mountains came quickly. I packed light, clothes for hiking, a few books, and snacks. Julia picked me up early on Saturday. The drive was peaceful, with no pressure to fill the silence. It felt strange but good, just the comfort of being with someone who didn't expect anything from me. We reached the mountain town by noon. It was small, quiet, and far from the city's chaos. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine trees. The simplicity of it all felt refreshing. After settling into the cabin, we headed out for a hike. The path was challenging, but the view from the top made it worthwhile. The mountains stretched for miles, blanketed in trees. At the summit, I felt a sense of clarity. The chaos in my mind began to quiet, replaced by the beauty around me. Julia smiled, her cheeks flushed. It's amazing up here, isn't it? Yeah, it really is, I said, taking in the view. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. There was no anger or sadness weighing me down. Just the simple joy of being in a beautiful place with someone who understood I didn't need to be fixed. I wasn't rushing anywhere. I was just here. That evening, we sat by the fire in the cabin, talking about anything and everything. The conversation was easy. We laughed, shared memories, and talked about our future, but nothing too heavy. I realized how much I missed this, being able to connect without expectations. As the night went on, I found myself looking at Julia differently. There was something comforting about her presence, but I knew I wasn't ready for anything serious. We ended the night with a quiet walk under the stars. It was a peaceful moment, no need for words. We didn't rush, and I appreciated that. I wasn't sure where this would go, but for the first time in a while, I wasn't worried. Life was messy, but it was making sense again. Maybe I was finally ready for whatever came next. The weekend in the mountains left me feeling more grounded than I'd felt in months. Julia and I returned to the city on Sunday, but the quiet of the mountains lingered with me. There was something calming about the space we had shared, no expectations, no pressure. It reminded me of what it felt like to just be myself again, without the weight of past mistakes. Back in the routine of daily life, I felt a shift. I wasn't thinking about Sarah constantly anymore. The anger and betrayal had faded, replaced by a quiet sense of resolution. I knew the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but I was learning to accept that the past couldn't be changed. I had to keep moving forward, no matter how uncertain the future felt. Julia and I still talked, but I wasn't rushing anything. She was understanding, never pushing me for more than I was ready to give. We continued seeing each other, but it felt different now. I was open to the possibility, but I wasn't forcing it. One evening, after a long day at work, I found myself sitting on the balcony of my apartment, watching the sunset. The colors in the sky reminded me of that peace I had found in the mountains. I realized I had been so focused on the pain and loss that I'd forgotten what it felt like to just be happy with where I was in the moment. In that quiet moment, I had a revelation. The key to moving on wasn't about rushing into a new relationship or forcing closure. It was about learning to be comfortable with myself again. It was about healing in my own time and not comparing it to others' expectations. I wasn't sure where things with Julia would go, but I knew that, for the first time, I was content with the journey ahead, whatever it might bring. I was finally learning to trust in myself again, and that was the most important step of all. As the weeks passed, I found myself becoming more attuned to the simple pleasures of life. I spent time with friends, enjoyed quiet evenings at home, and allowed myself to feel hopeful again. The shadow of the past wasn't gone, but it was fading, replaced by a quiet understanding that I had the power to shape my future. Julia and I continued to spend time together, but nothing felt forced. It was comfortable. We'd talk for hours over coffee or take spontaneous walks, always letting things unfold naturally. There were no expectations, no pressure. It felt different from everything I'd known in my past relationship, and that was exactly what I needed. One night, after a long day, Julia and I went out to dinner. The conversation flowed easily, and for the first time in a while, I felt truly at ease. As we walked out of the restaurant, she smiled at me, her eyes warm and kind. "I'm really glad we did this," she said, her voice soft. "Me too," I replied, feeling a sense of contentment settle over me. We stood there for a moment, the noise of the city around us, but it felt like we were in our own little bubble. I wasn't thinking about what happened before. I wasn't worried about the future. I was just present, and that felt like enough. As the days continued to pass, I realized that moving on wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about learning from it. I had to let go of the anger, the self-doubt, and the regret. I wasn't going to let what happened define me. I had the power to decide who I wanted to be from this point forward. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I was excited to find out. I had learned to trust myself again, to trust that I could find peace and happiness on my own terms. And that, more than anything, was the beginning of something new.